Today, we're talking about something every leader faces, but few of us enjoy: conflict. Welcome back to Lead in 10 Quick Devotions for Christian Leaders. I'm Chris Moore. Whether it's disagreements over strategy, personality clashes, or communication breakdowns, conflict is inevitable in any organization. But while conflict itself is neutral, how we handle it can either tear teams apart or bring them closer together. As Christian leaders, we have wisdom that can transform conflict from something that we merely survive to something that actually strengthens our teams. Let's begin by looking at what the Bible says about handling conflict with grace. Matthew 18, verse 15 says, "Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother." This direct instruction from Jesus provides a powerful framework for addressing conflict. This passage reveals something important about human nature. We tend to mishandle conflicts. Think about our common responses when conflicts arise. Some of us avoid conflict completely. We pretend the issue doesn't exist. We hope it will just resolve itself. We work around the person rather than with them. Others escalate conflict immediately. We vent to colleagues. We aren't part of the solution. We email the entire team about an issue with one person. We address problems publicly that should be handled privately. Still others, they internalize conflict. We simmer in silent resentment. We mentally rehearse conversations that we never actually have. We do it over and over again. We disengage while technically still showing up. Jesus' instructions cut through all of these unhealthy approaches. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. This simple directive challenges our avoidance, our escalation, and our internalization. It calls us to something much more courageous: direct, private, respectful engagement. And notice the goal. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. This objective isn't winning the argument or proving that you're right. It's reconciliation. It's restoration. It's preserving and ultimately even in strengthening that relationship. I mean, our natural approaches to conflict, they often prioritize our comfort over a resolution, our pride over reconciliation. We prioritize our feelings over our relationships. But as Christian leaders, as Christians, we're called to a higher standard, one that moves toward conflict with courage, but also with grace. The goal is not to win, but to gain a brother or sister. So what does this passage reveal about God? First, God provides specific guidance on resolving disputes. Conflict isn't an area where God leaves us to figure out things on our own. He gives practical instruction on how to handle broken and potentially broken relationships. This makes sense when we consider who God is, the ultimate reconciler, the one who took extraordinary measures to restore the relationship between himself and humanity. Second, God values both truth and relationship. Jesus doesn't say, well, ignore the fault for the sake of keeping the peace. But he also doesn't say, broadcast the fault to everyone who's going to listen. Instead, he establishes this process, a process that honors both the importance of addressing a wrong and the preciousness of the relationship. This balance reflects God's own nature. He doesn't compromise truth for the sake of a relationship, but he also never sacrifices relationship on the altar of being right. Finally, God's ultimate goal in conflict is restoration. You have gained your brother. That's the language of recovery, not loss, of healing, not harm, of reconciliation, not rejection. This is God's heart, not to condemn, but to restore, not to destroy, but to rebuild, not to separate, but to reconcile. And as leaders who should be representing him, that should be our heart in conflict too. So how do we apply these principles in our own leadership? First, we should Address conflicts directly and promptly. Matthew 18:15 is clear. Go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. This means having the courage to address issues directly rather than just hoping they will resolve themselves, because they rarely do. Talking to everyone else about it except for the actual person involved, or worse, just letting resentment build up in you as you avoid a needed conversation. As a leader, model this by addressing concerns promptly, naming those elephants in the room, and creating an environment where you can respectfully disagree. And respectful disagreement is even encouraged. Unaddressed conflicts, they don't disappear. They just go underground. They bury themselves in, and these underground conflicts are far more damaging than those that are out in the open, because they erode trust, and they will actually poison your culture from inside the individual. Biblical conflict resolution separates the problem from the person. It maintains dignity while addressing that concern. In practice, this means using I statements. I noticed, I'm concerned, describing behaviors rather than attributing motives, being specific about actions rather than making generalizations, and keep the conflict focused on a resolution, on a solution, not blame. This approach makes it much more likely that the person is going to actually hear you, because they're not immediately defensive, trying to defend their character. We also need to make sure we have an established, clear process for team conflicts. Jesus didn't just give a principle, he outlined a process. Matthew 18 continues with steps to take if the initial conversation doesn't work. Similarly, your team needs a clear, consistent process for addressing conflicts, an expectation that people speak directly to each other first, guidelines for when to involve their leaders, and a framework for mediated conversations when direct communication fails. When everyone understands the process, conflict becomes less threatening, and it becomes something much more manageable. It's no longer chaotic, but it becomes a structured opportunity for growth. As a leader, your team is watching how you handle disagreement. Do you avoid difficult conversations, or do you face them head on? Do you become defensive when challenged, or do you remain open for what somebody has to say? Do you hold on to hurts, or do you extend forgiveness? Modeling healthy conflict resolution means demonstrating both courage to address issues directly, humility to acknowledge your own role in the problem, and honesty about your concerns. But you also need to make sure you give grace, even towards someone who has disappointed you. Perhaps the most powerful example you can set is acknowledging when you're wrong, apologizing, sincerely apologizing, and then changing your course when necessary. When we as leaders, we're just individuals, as friends, as peers, when we model this kind of humility, it creates a culture where admitting mistakes isn't seen as weakness, but as strength. Matthew 18, verse 15 teaches us to address conflicts directly and privately with this goal of restoration. So as we review, we need to recognize that we often avoid, escalate, or internalize conflicts. God provides guidance that honors both truth and relationship. We can navigate conflict with grace by addressing those issues promptly, focusing on the issues, not on the character, establishing some processes, and modeling courage and humility in our Christian walk. So, your challenge: do you have one lingering conflict? You need to approach it with the intent to resolve it peacefully. Is there a conversation you've been avoiding? A misunderstanding, perhaps, that needs clarification? Take the initiative to address it directly, privately, and graciously. Not trying to prove you're right. You're trying to restore relationship, because when conflicts are handled well, they don't just resolve problems, they actually strengthen bonds between people. Thank you for joining today's Lead in 10. If this message helped you, share it with someone else who might be navigating a challenging situation. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll get more of these weekday devotionals. Until tomorrow, lead with courage, communicate with grace, and remember that how you handle conflict may be one of your greatest leadership testimonies.